Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Paladin skill known as Prayer. I know, it's not particularly the most amazing skill, and it actually has some pretty horrible defects, which is, well, it kind of sucks in terms of... It kind of sucks in terms of just, you know, like, just generally being useful at a low level. And to really kind of exemplify this, I think I need to actually go to a character that's like level 1 and show you what it's like when you're on a paladin at level 1 and you put your first point into prayer. Prayer is weird. And when I mean weird, I mean like weird bad, not weird good. But it also has some interesting mechanics which make it good, but not to actually use it. I know it's confusing, okay? But let's go bonk a monster. Let's kill one thing. You know, get our first level, and let's put our point into prayer, so you can see what I mean. So let's kill a couple doojanks here. Get like one doojank. You know what? Let's go up to P8. That way we can get better. We can get better EXP per kill. That way we get more doojanks per doojank. Now, let's say you're a low-level paladin, and you're first leveling up your character, and you're like, alright, I've got some interesting choices for auras. I've got Might, I've got Sacrifice, Smite, and I've got Prayer, and Resist Fire, Resist Cold, and Resist Lightning. Those are my early choices, right? You look at Prayer, and Prayer basically boasts a very interesting effect, which is the ability to heal you, right? And you're like, okay, well, being able to heal myself would be nice. Plus 2 heals. It costs 1 mana per second, it says. So we throw it on, and very shortly after we put it on, you start to notice that your mana drains at a really kind of insanely fast rate. And this is actually pretty stupid, because early on in the game, you don't even really have very much mana to begin with. So as a level 1 aura that costs 1 mana per second, you will be out of mana in roughly about 16 seconds, because it will consume every single mana that you own to the point where you're at 0. Now here's the beautiful part. Not only does it continue to keep sucking away all the mana from your soul, like your ex-wife, who you already divorced, but keeps coming back for more, it won't stop, ever. It just always sucks your mana away, even if your HP is full. So even if you have full health, and there's literally no reason to keep sucking the soul from my very marrow, it doesn't stop, and it just keeps my mana at 0 the entire time. And for this reason, prayer never gets used, really. And to make matters worse, when you level up, guess what? It's just going to keep sucking your mana away more. But when you level up and put another point into it, it goes up in the amount of mana cost that it starts sucking away from you. It actually increases in its sucking of your soul, and it doesn't stop. The higher level it gets, the more mana it sucks away, and it eventually gets to the point where it's just untenable no matter what character you're on, because you just can't take that much mana being drained away from you at any given time. There's absolutely no way for you to counter the amount of soul sucking that is coming from this skill. So why do I still think that it's a good skill? Well, despite the fact that it's absolutely garbage at an early level, there are other ways that you can take advantage of prayer without necessarily having to use it yourself. Using it yourself is horrible. In fact, I would recommend never actually using it yourself unless you have just like a sea of mana potions to chug at all times, or a meditation aura that you can use. And in which case, if you're going to use meditation, you should use meditation, and we'll get to that later. But there are other ways. One such way is to go to Act 2. Now, when you go to Act 2, there is a mercenary there, and the mercenary there has prayer. And he also has a mana cost. But you know what's very interesting about mercenaries? They don't have mana. In fact, they don't spend mana. They don't have mana, they don't spend mana. Mana doesn't mean anything to them. So despite the fact that prayer has a mana cost, when you hire a prayer mercenary, which of course there wouldn't be a prayer mercenary up here specifically for my video. Let me relog and refresh the mercenaries real quick. But when you hire a prayer mercenary, they don't have to spend mana, which means that you can actually get the effect of the prayer from them for free. And it's way better than using it yourself. On top of this, prayer has some very interesting side effects that come with building the ability. So when you actually utilize prayer, like for instance with Pratham here, Pratham has a current prayer which is level 18, costs 4.1 mana per second, which is stupid insane, and has a radius of 33.3 yards. Goes pretty far. It heals everybody for 21 health. Basically, I think it's every 2 seconds, according to the ability. Although it doesn't really say that, but I'm pretty sure it's a 2-second pulse. Now, prayer synergizes with several other things. So cleansing also synergizes with prayer, and meditation synergizes with prayer. These two abilities are really interesting in the way that they synergize, because prayer no longer costs mana when utilized in the synergistic form. So you notice when I look at cleansing, it says prayer plus 9 life healed every 2 seconds. It doesn't say a mana cost. So if I'm utilizing cleansing on my character, and I have a relatively high level of prayer, then the prayer's healing gets transferred directly to cleansing. Another interesting thing that we have to talk about is that prayer is one of the only 2 abilities within the game that functions off of soft points, not just hard points. So this is a very interesting thing. So when you look at prayer, you notice that it's currently at level 8 and it heals for 9, which means that we're getting a 9 heal every 2 seconds, right? Well, if I take off my principal armor, which has +2 skills, you'll notice that the healing goes down to 7. The synergy bonus also goes down to 7, because the synergy bonus is actually working off of soft points. This is one of the only 2 abilities in the game that actually works off of soft points with the synergy. The only other one is the Druid Summoning Tree, which is basically just the bear, the wolf, and the dire wolves. Those 3 actually function off of soft point synergies as well. But prayer is one of the only other abilities in the game that functions off of soft point synergies, which means that you can beef prayer up with just +2 skills, or you can put hard points in it and put +2 skills in it, and you can get a pretty massive heal. You can also double or even triple this heal by utilizing other pieces of equipment that also have the adjacent auras. So for instance, if I were to use a plague sword or a cure helmet, which utilizes the cleansing aura, I would get the healing bonus from prayer without having to actually use the skill. Similarly, with meditation, if I was using an insight polearm that has meditation on it, I could potentially get the healing benefit from prayer without actually using the prayer item. Another very interesting thing is that the Mercenary also gets these synergy bonuses, which means that you can set up a pretty godlike Mercenary that has a triple regen. 1 coming from the prayer at 21 heal per second, or per 2 seconds. 2 coming from a meditation polearm, which would give you another 21 heal per 2 seconds, and then a cure helmet, which would be number 3, which would give you another 21 heal per 2 seconds. So you would be looking at 21 plus 21, which is 42, and 42 plus 21, which is 63, I think. So you would have a pretty massive regeneration of 63 health every 2 seconds to everyone within the radius of the auras. Now, the only downside to this is that the Cure Helmet is only level 1 cleansing, so it doesn't go very far, which means you have to kind of stand directly underneath of the Mercenary to actually get the effect. Meditation, on the other hand, from the polearm is level 17 and pretty much hits everybody within the radius. And then on top of that, the prayer aura itself that comes from the Mercenary is 33.3 yards, so hits everyone. The only unfortunate side effect of this particular build with utilizing the cleansing aura, the meditation polearm from the insight, and the prayer aura is that all of this amazing regen doesn't affect the Mercenary. So the Mercenaries have their own regeneration system, which is separate from the player's regeneration system. And this type of regen that heals for 21 every 2 seconds is actually a player regen system, not a Mercenary regen system. And so since they are actually separate, the regeneration from these tri-auras doesn't actually affect the Mercenary. He also doesn't get any effect from meditation, because of course he has no mana, and the only aura that he actually benefits from is the cleansing aura, which will remove the poisons and curses from him. So although this regeneration build is actually pretty amazing for players, it's actually pretty crap for the Mercenary, because he doesn't get a whole lot out of it. He basically gets nothing except for the cleansing aura. And in this way, you can actually beef up prayer pretty ridiculously. There's actually a paladin within our kinship called the Party Pally, and the purpose of the Party Pally is to get as many plus defensive skills as he possibly can, in the form of defensive skillers, +3 defensive necklaces, maybe even Seraph's Hymn, things like that have as many plus defensive skills as you can possibly get, beefing up prayer to a ridiculously high regeneration rate. And to really get an idea of the kind of craziness that this would ensue, let's take a look real quick over at Amazon Basin, and let's see how high the regeneration gets on prayer, depending on your plus to skills. So if we were to get prayer to, let's say, level 50, which at level 50 costs 10.1875 mana per second, which is awful. It has a radius of 76 yards, which is downright insane, and it heals for 107 life at level 50. So if you were to set up a paladin with 3 auras, for instance, a cleansing aura, and a meditation aura, with level 50 prayer, you could effectively have a regeneration rate of 107 times 3. So 107 times 3 for all 3 auras, which would be a massive 321 HP per 2 seconds. So we could divide that by 2 for our per second, which is 160 HP a second, which is pretty massive regeneration. You're talking about your HP just filling up basically in no time. Right now I have 2,041 HP, so we could take that 160 a second. We could go 2,041 divided by 160 a second, and it would take roughly 12 seconds, a little over 12, so let's say 13 seconds, a little over 13 seconds to completely fill our HP pool, which is kind of ridiculous. And not only that, but this is an AoE effect. So this is going to hit everybody on the field of battle at any given time, which is pretty crazy. On top of this, if the Paladin were running prayer, which does cost a lot of mana, and meditation at the same time, meditation would pretty much cancel out the mana costs of prayer, allowing you to literally run all 3 auras with all 3 regenerations on the same paladin in a group, which is pretty crazy. As for prayer using it natively, it tends to not ever really get used natively, because that mana cost is just really too high. And I'd like to kind of turn the attention away from, I'm just checking to see what Cody's eating back there, away from, like, the skill, and more about how they could potentially fix it. First off, I'd like to see the mana cost actually start really high. I know that's kind of a silly thing, but I'd like to see it very similar to Double Swing on the Barbarian. So the more points that you put into prayer, the lower the mana cost goes, until eventually around level 9 or 10, the mana cost would reach 0. If you did this with prayer, I think you might see more people actually utilize it, because the mana cost is one of the biggest deterrents of the ability, and nobody wants to actually use the ability when they don't actually get the effect. And I think that's the worst part about the ability, is that if you use prayer, if you actually put the ability on and use it, it just drains your mana until there's no mana left. And the biggest issue with this is that eventually your mana hits 0, and once your mana hits 0, it's not working anymore, because prayer doesn't heal unless you have mana. And so I think making it so that if you actually invest in the skill would reduce the mana cost, not increase it, and maybe start the mana cost at a higher amount and a slow decrease as you level it up, would encourage players to actually utilize it more often in early game. Other than that, I don't really think there's a whole lot more they could do with it. It definitely does have a really powerful regen, and I've 3D-crafted a couple characters around it. Badgerine of the Starmen, who literally had so much regen that he could just stand there next to Lilith and not die, which was pretty crazy. I think he was running like 300 some odd regen. Between the prayer, the cleansing, the meditation, and all of the regeneration items that I found for him, as well as putting Dole runes in his equipment, which was another way that you could get regen, believe it or not. I was able to get some pretty sick regen on that character, to the point of basically like him becoming invulnerable for the most part in most situations. Now, granted, he didn't really have a lot of damage output, so he wasn't actually killing a lot of stuff, but he wasn't dying either. And I just thought it was a fun way to build a character, just to see if theoretically it was possible to have so much regen that monsters basically just couldn't kill you. And believe it or not, it is actually possible. And it took some of the more nasty monsters in the game to actually overcome that regen to the point of ridiculous. Like, they needed to like poison me and hit me pretty dang hard to cause the regen to fail to the point where I would die. I think that's pretty much everything when it comes to prayer. Prayer isn't like one of the main abilities that the Paladin has, but it's definitely something that can be utilized to your advantage. If you are utilizing things like a Plague Sword, which has Cleansing Aura on it, a Cure Helmet, which has Cleansing Aura on it, or maybe even if you're using a Meditation polearm for some reason on your Paladin, having a couple points in prayer does not hurt at all. In fact, it's just going to give you a passive regen that's going to get added into your Cleansing Aura, and it just makes a lot of sense to at least throw 1 point into it. For instance, I've built a couple Paladins over the past that have utilized a Cleansing Sword, and see if I can find one. I've got many. Frosty Cheeks, I believe, was utilizing one of them, although it doesn't look like he has it on right now. That's definitely not a Plague Sword. And his Plague Sword is straight up missing. Is it in your stash, sir? It is. No, it's not in his stash. It's gone. But if you are utilizing it, you're going to want to put at least 1 point into prayer, because that way your plus to skills, your pretty much anything you have on there are going to beef up prayer, soft point wise, are going to give you that synergy to cleansing as well, and give you a little bit of just passive regen. It's 1 skill point, and it's 1 skill point that's very well spent. In fact, most paladins end up going down and grabbing vigor anyway, so you're usually going to have at least 1 skill point in prayer. If you are a class that has a dump stat, like, for instance, maybe you're just a character that doesn't really have a lot of skill point usage, and you've got extra skill points to spare, and you happen to be using a cleansing a cleansing helmet or a cleansing sword, then again, prayer might be a good dump stat just to give yourself a little bit of extra regen, on that particular character. And I've done this on many characters that have used the Plague Sword, because the Plague Sword is pretty phenomenal, to be honest. And anytime that you have a permanent cleansing effect on you, it helps to throw a little bit of points into prayer to get that regen up to a point where it's actually going to be useful to you. Another interesting thing about prayer that I almost forgot is that prayer actually can stack if the aura levels are the same. So normally most auras will cancel each other out in most given situations. So for instance, like say you had 2 paladins and one was running level 30 fanaticism and the other is running level 25. The level 30 fanaticism cancels out the 25 and takes over. But in the case of prayer, for some reason or another, if the level of prayer is the same across all the characters that are utilizing it, it means that the prayer actually stacks in effectiveness. So a very interesting and very odd idea that you could potentially utilize this for is, let's say you had a 8-man group, and all players of the 8-man group were utilizing meditation polearms and prayer mercs with cure helmets, right? If you had 8 of them and they were all the same level merc, they all had the same level prayer, it would all have to be the same, so you would have to match everything up. All of the prayers would be active at the same time. All of the effects would be active at the same time. To give you an idea of what that would look like, let's go back to the prayer mercenary over on let's just go find one real quick. And let's look and see what his prayer level is. And we'll multiply that by 3, and then we'll multiply that by 8. And that'll give us an idea of how much regeneration there would be inside this absolutely silly group of characters. Now, granted, unfortunately, all of the meditation polearms would also have to be the same level. This is also another interesting thing that we have to take into account. So in this particular case, it's 21 heals every 2 seconds, right, with prayer. So let's do a little bit of multiplication on this, and let's see if we can figure it out. So it would be 21 times 3 times 8, which would be a total of 504 regeneration every 2 seconds, which would be pretty insane. Across all 8 players, you would literally be regenerating, let's see here, divided by 2, 252 HP every second, which if we divided our HP real quick, divided by 252, we're looking at around 8 seconds to completely regenerate to full HP on any character that's within range. And that's pretty ridiculously insane. When you consider the fact that you can have multiple. Now, you could also beef this up even more by giving the character some plus to skills, but all of the characters would have to have the same amount of plus to skills. Keep this in mind. But every point that you increase prayer past its normal level is going to also increase the regeneration. So one more point here would give me one more point of healing, which would bring me to 22, which would be 22 times 3 times 8, which is going to increase it even more to 528, and so forth and so on. And it would take some pretty massive coordination, but it would also make the group practically unkillable with a huge AoE regeneration field, which would just encompass pretty much everything. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just talking about prayer. And as always, keep watching.